So, I'm Jenn, and my partner's Harper, and we're doing the ethics of genetically engineering organisms for our TOK presentation.
Our first real life situation is the cloning of animals. A few years back, there was a sheep that they cloned, and they kept her in the laboratory, and she lived for, I think it was about 8 years until she died.
So, our next real life situation is genetically modifying genes to create a more perfect child. And this came from kind of like, we saw a couple articles and stuff with the sheep and with children that were being genetically modified by their parents before they were born so that they were more perfect in their parents' eyes.
So, the first real life situation on the cloning of the sheep Dolly came from an article that we read on The Atlantic in our Theory of Knowledge class, and it spiked our interest. So we dug more into it and continued looking for more articles.
The second real life situation on genetically modifying genes to create a more perfect child came from a member in my family actually tested to be that they have Down syndrome, but since they don't have any side effects, it means that they're a carrier. So when they go to have children, their children have a greater chance of having Down syndrome since their parent is a carrier, and possibly their spouse could be a carrier like themselves that don't show any traits, but then their kid could have a double dose and definitely have Down syndrome. So this was kind of interesting to me when I heard about it because the family member actually talked about genetically modifying their kid when they were ready to have a kid so that they knew that their kid wouldn't have Down syndrome or any type of other deformity, yeah. And also it's really neat because now, like I know when my mom had me, she had all these blood tests done to tell her like, okay, am I gonna have any kind of rare disease and stuff. So I feel like parents that have that kind of blood testing done when they're pregnant kind of makes them even consider genetically modifying their kids so that maybe their kid could have a different kind of life than what they're actually meant to have.
Our first knowledge question is, to what extent does perception affect ethics? And to what extent we mean like in what ways and how. And perception is the way of knowing, and it's like how a different person has like different views on the world, and it can affect what they believe. Effect is like how or what reaction, or how is the reaction caused by um, the way a person will see the world. And then ethics is an area of knowledge, and it helps a person determine like the morality of the situation and what they think to be right or what they think to be wrong.
So when you tie all of these different components together, you're able to look at our real life situations and kind of think more in depth of, okay, where do these come from? How can they change the world? And what is their impact on daily life?
The definition of perception is how different views of the world collide, and perception is like the way of understanding or the way that a person will interpret like the real life situation based on their beliefs, such as like their how they were raised ethically and stuff like that.
So also like perception can be influenced by other factors such as religion and things where you grow up your whole life thinking one thing and then it gets challenged when you're an adult, such as probably when my mom was little, they didn't have genetically modifying genes and stuff, but now they do. So we were raised the same way, but kind of like our outlook on the world can be different because of the different things we're exposed to. And since the world's always changing, so are the perceptions by everyone. But
especially new generations.
yeah, it's kind of cool because each new generation can have their own perception of how they view the world and the things in it.
The definition of ethics is how something is determined to be right or wrong, and how we know that whether or not it is right or wrong. And it's basically like your personal beliefs challenged, and you're forced to you yourself decide whether or not you think it's wrong or right based on the way you were raised or your belief system.
Yeah, so also you have ethics versus morals. So something could be ethically right, but according to your own morals, it could be wrong. So there's a big controversy of where the two cross and the big gray area of the middle of, or maybe it's ethically right but morally wrong, or maybe it's morally right but ethically wrong. So it kind of, ethics really ties back into perception in a sense that you can ethically think one way, but the morals that you were raised by could lead you to think another way. So you have to find the area in the middle where they meet.
Yeah, there's also a lot of contradiction when it comes to ethics, because one person may find it to be correct in their mind, whereas the entire world could view it as horribly wrong, and that's where a lot of controversy comes up with this situation. The perspectives of our first knowledge question with the real life situation of the cloning of the sheep is that it could be seen as harmful on the animals, because, like, if the um, cloning of an animal goes wrong, the sheep could be defective and have disorders such as not being able to eat or having messed up organs that can cause it to slowly die and be very painful. And but a benefit, like a good perspective that people could have on it, is that the cloning of animals can produce more animals that are an endangered species, or it can help boost the economy, because, like, if more animals such as sheep are produced, then the production of wool will go up, and that's good for exporting goods, and that can cause a better economy.
Also, it kind of can, in a sense, help with extinction if, like, sheep aren't extinct, but say one day they were going to be extinct. Now that they can clone them, they can kind of prevent them from being extinct. Although some people may think that these aren't true sheep and stuff, so it's kind of all how you look at it. So, the perspective of our knowledge question with reference to the real life situation of genetically modifying genes could be that it can be viewed as wrong to create a perfect child, and that the chances should be left up to fate. Also, with this, like, if you're trying to create a perfect child and you're modifying your child's DNA and their genes and stuff, something can go wrong, and it can be devastating for the parent because you can think your child's going to come out one way, and then it could come out something totally different that hasn't been shown on the test, and it'll be very detrimental to the parents. Or also, say something goes wrong and the parent loses the child, has a miscarriage, and they never can have a child again. They're always going to think back and think, well, what if I didn't do this? Did I cause my child to die? Was it something I did, or was it meant to be? Also, it can prevent a child from having disorders if one of their parents carries a gene for it, such as with the Down syndrome. But the gene mutations and the modifying of these mutations has to be successful. So it's very, like, particular, and it comes down to a very precise era where there's not really room for mistakes or any kind of second guessing, because once you do it, you kind of have already done it.
And when looking at the perception of this, a lot of people may find it to be extremely scary because it's a new form of experiment and it hasn't exactly been tested on a whole lot. So a lot of new parents may say that they're against it simply because it's new and it scares them. Whereas, like, the newer generation would probably be more open to it because they were raised in a different time of technology, so they trust more technology, and they feel like science has made such great advancements in their time period that they can fully rely on it to do what they need it to.
So, our second knowledge question is, how are ethics and reason related in science? So, to what extent was before, but it also ties in with how. So, it's to what extent can kind of be a synonym for how, in the sense of in what ways does it change the world. Um, Ethics is an area of knowledge with how things are right or wrong. Reason is a way of knowing with how can we justify our issues, how do we back up our choices with proof of why we did them. Related just means how are the two things working together. So how do reason and ethics work interchangeably to make things better? And science would be the natural sciences, which is an area of knowledge. And how do things relate to humans, and how can they really have an impact?
Um, with ethics and reason, a lot more logic is tied into reason, and it gives a person an opportunity to argue their ethical decision, and it gives them a chance to explain to others how they feel um, one thing may be correct, whereas one thing may be incorrect.
So, with reason helps us in deciding which choices we make, and it gives us a justification for the actions and the choices that we make. So, reason is kind of our own little process in our mind of how we can justify the actions that we take or the things that we say or do. And reason just gives you a power of mind through logic and how you kind of think out why you're doing something and you weigh the pros and the cons.
Um, like I said, reason will give a person an opportunity to argue their side of the story. So, like, if a woman found out that her child was going to have a gene for, like, Down syndrome, then they could argue that they don't want their child to be bullied in, further down in life, or they want their child to have more opportunities than they feel like they would if they had Down syndrome. And reason just opens up a
whole new way of looking at the world. So, natural sciences focus on the different studies of behavior and kind of like why we do what we do. So, it really ties in with reason of this is why we do it related to science, but reason can be used to back up why we do it. And with natural sciences, we also have confirmation bias, which is the tendency of an individual to interpret knowledge in a way that they already believe. So, if you already believe something, it's easier for you to kind of justify your actions based on that.
Like with science, there's a lot of reason behind their methods. Like, they have done all the math and they've done all the experiments that helps them determine whether or not the procedure can be performed and whether or not it can be done so safely. But even though they reason that they have all the like understandings of it, they could be wrong and a mistake could happen.
So, with natural sciences, it kind of ties back into your biology classes where you're learning how the body works. And if the scientists don't understand all the specifics of how the body works, it makes it so much harder for them to try to do things such as cloning or to modify genes and whatnot. Like, there may be a gene that someone has that is very rare and they don't know how to modify it because they haven't been in contact with it much.
There could also be, like, in an instance where the woman or the mother or the father of the child has a mutation in their body that was not first discovered because it was dormant, and that could affect the outcome of the entire procedure if something goes wrong.
So the perspective of our knowledge question, well, the second knowledge question, in respect to the cloning of sheep and animals, is That it can be reasoned that if animals are cloned, then the production of animal products such as milk, wool, and meats can boost the economy or boost the amount of exports to other countries.
Um, it can also be like wrong, depending on how the person was raised, because if they were raised to ethically believe that God is the creator of all the animals and He um, should be the only creator, then the people would feel as if it was their obligation to object to the cloning of animals because the like human beings are using science to try and be more godlike creatures, and it can just like threaten their religious belief system and
They
stuff
can
like that.
threaten their belief system in a sense that, like, depending on what they actually believe, they can feel that science is becoming too evolved and science is going too far and taking things to the extreme, and there aren't really any limits in science. Whereas science is always evolving and breaking boundaries and trying to find new ways to do things. If you believe a certain way, then you may think that science should have certain boundaries where they can't expand beyond those. So, the perspectives of knowledge, the second knowledge question in reference to the real life situation with genetically modifying the genes or DNA of babies, is that in this situation it can be reasoned that if one or both parents were guaranteed to transfer a disability to their unborn child, then they should have the right to decide what gene or genes their child should inherit to ensure that the kids will have a healthy life in their future. So, in a way, it's kind of a preventive for parents to be able to ensure that their child is going to be able to live a long, happy, and healthy life before they're born. Because once they're born, they could get sick, and you can't really prevent that. But they're trying to take all the precautions beforehand that they can. And so, if parents are aware of these possibilities, then they should be able to consider other ways, or like if the parents don't want to do genetically modifying before they have a child, if they're aware of this, then they could think of different ways to have children, maybe adopting or something so that they don't pass on the genes if they're against it. And so when looking at ethics, it can be considered to be morally wrong, whereas religious people may believe that God created people in his own image and no human should be changed in order to look perfect in the eyes of a human, because all children are perfect in the eyes of God. So also some people can see this as ethically right because they see it as the parents attempting to ensure a healthier and happier future for their child to be.
Um,
So, in conclusion, perception impacts how we view the world and how it may change with new technologies.
Ethics will impact the choices that humans make and how the choices are viewed as to be whether right or wrong.
And then reason helps us decide and what decision we are making and gives us the justification to be able to back up that decision. So, lastly, this relates to other real life situations, such as creating human tissue out of plants, where we read an article where they use a spinach leaf to
use the vascular like system to treat it like heart tissue and allow blood and oxygen to flow through it.
So this just shows how science is always evolving and how some people it ties back into ethics where some people may not think it's right or wrong, and that ties into reason of why you think it's right or wrong. And so it kind of all just wraps up into how the world works and how it's evolving over time.